Emily, this isn't a negotiation. Your brother's slush fund has always been the family's private reserve, and the silent transfer to your aunt is already underway. You signing these papers is the only thing keeping the business partners from choosing sides against you. Refuse, and you'll watch every account you touch get frozen while the rest of us move forward. I've already spoken to them. They understand where the real power sits. Sign tonight or lose everything you've pretended to build here. The facade is crumbling either way. Hi, my name is Emily Harper. I am 35 years old. The words hung in the air of the private lounge at the luxury mountain retreat, like smoke that refused to clear. My mother Diane stood across the polished table with the transfer documents spread out between us, her voice steady and cold. She had pulled me aside right after the morning strategy session, away from the other executives and the panoramic view of snow-dusted peaks. No one else was in the room, just the two of us and the stack of papers that would quietly move control of several key accounts and equity stakes straight to my Aunt Linda. I kept my face blank, calculated, driven. That was how I survived in this family. I reached for the pen, let my fingers rest on it for 3 full seconds, then set it down without signing. Diane's eyes narrowed, but she didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. The threat was already delivered. I walked out of the lounge without another word and headed straight for the small business center on the lower level of the retreat. The place was quiet midweek. Most of the partners were still in the main conference room debating expansion numbers. I logged into the shared printer queue under the pretext of checking a report and pulled the last 20 pages that had been sent to print that morning. Among the routine memos and financial summaries was a single sheet that didn't belong a phone log printout. My mother's cell number appeared 14 times in the last 72 hours, all calls to my Aunt Linda. The timestamps lined up with moments when I had been in meetings or out on the trails. No names, just numbers and durations. One call had lasted 23 minutes at 2:17 a.m. the night before. I folded the page and slipped it into my jacket. My hands stayed steady. Inside, something sharp and cold clicked into place. This wasn't about family legacy or protecting assets. This was a coordinated move to cut me out using my brother David's long-hidden slush fund as the vehicle. The same fund David had quietly built over 8 years by skimming small percentages from side deals. I had known about it for 3 years. I had never touched it. Now my mother was using it as the bridge to move everything to Linda without triggering normal transfer reviews. Back in my suite, I spread the log on the desk and cross-referenced the times against my own calendar. Every call happened when I was occupied or asleep. Classic. I opened my secure laptop and pulled the last set of account statements I had access to. Hidden in a subfolder labeled Q3 projections were 3 pages that had been added since I last checked. They showed movement authorizations tied to David's private fund routing through a shell entity that ultimately pointed toward Linda's personal holdings. The amounts were not small. They represented the majority of the liquid reserves the company kept for rapid acquisitions. I didn't call anyone yet. I sat with the papers for 20 minutes letting the facts settle. Then I sent a single encrypted message to Robert Klein, one of the senior business partners who had been at the retreat. Need 5 minutes off record before the afternoon session. Private. He replied in under a minute. We met in the empty spa lounge on the West Wing. No one used it midday. Robert looked tired when he arrived. He didn't waste time. Diane already spoke to 3 of us this morning. She framed it as protecting the company from internal division, said you were pushing for a structure that would expose the older accounts. He paused. I told her I needed to see the actual paperwork before I agreed to anything. I showed him the phone log and the altered statements. He read them once, then again. His jaw tightened. This isn't protection. This is a raid. He didn't ask how I got the pages. He simply said, if this goes through, half the partners will walk. The other half will stay quiet and take the payout she's offering. I'm not staying quiet. We agreed to meet again after dinner. I returned to my suite and pulled the remaining account files I kept encrypted on a separate drive. The pattern was clear now. Over the past 6 weeks, my mother and aunt had moved small test amounts through David's slush fund into entities Linda controlled. Each transfer had been structured to look like routine vendor payments. If I hadn't caught the phone log, the final large movement would have happened under the cover of the retreat's strategic realignment paperwork. That evening, the full group reconvened for dinner in the main dining room. Diane sat at the head of the long table as if nothing had happened. Linda was there too calm and elegant, nodding along to conversation about ski conditions and next quarter targets. David was absent. He had flown in for 1 day, then left again, claiming a client emergency on the coast. Convenient? I ate little and spoke less. After the meal, I stepped onto the terrace overlooking the valley. The air was thin and cold. My phone vibrated with a message from Robert. Three partners just told me they're leaning toward Diane's proposal. They think you're the one creating instability. I typed back one line, give me until morning. I didn't sleep. Instead, I ran the numbers again and prepared a clean packet. At 6:12 a.m., I walked down to the business center and used the secure scanner to create a single PDF containing the phone log, the altered statements, and a short timeline I had written in neutral language. I sent it to my private attorney, Sarah Bennett, with the subject line, Urgent, Family Entity Review. She called back within 40 minutes. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, this crosses into potential wire fraud and tax evasion territory if the slush fund was never reported. The fact that they used it to mass transfers to a family member makes it worse. I can have a forensic accountant on it by noon, but you need to decide how far you want to push this. I told her to start the review, but hold any external filings until I gave the word. Then I went back to my suite and waited for the next move. It came at 9:40 a.m. during the scheduled partner roundtable. Diane stood and announced that several legacy adjustments would be voted on before lunch. She distributed fresh copies of the transfer documents. When she reached my seat, she paused for half a second, then placed the papers in front of me with a small, tight smile. You'll want to review these one more time, Emily. I didn't touch them. Instead, I walked to the front of the room and placed my own single-page document on the projector. The phone log filled the screen. I didn't speak. I let the timestamps and the two phone numbers speak for themselves. The room went silent except for the low hum of the projector fan. Diane's face didn't change, but her hands went very still on the table. Linda looked at the screen once then, down at her own untouched coffee. Robert Klein cleared his throat and said, I think we need to pause this vote. Three other partners nodded. One of them, a man who had been with the company for 18 years, asked quietly, whose numbers are those? I answered in the same detached tone I had used all morning, my mother's and my aunt's. The calls coincide exactly with the movement authorizations that appeared in the accounts yesterday. No one shouted, no one stood up and left. The silence was heavier than any argument. Diane finally spoke. This is a private family matter that doesn't belong in a business meeting. Robert answered before I could. It became a business matter the moment you asked us to sign documents that move company reserves through an unreported fund. The meeting ended without a vote. Partners filed out in small groups, already forming new alliances. I stayed behind long enough to collect my papers, then walked back to my suite. My hands were steady. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. I called Sarah again. Start the formal review, and loop in the forensic team. I want every transfer traced. She didn't ask if I was sure. She simply said, understood. This will take time, and it will get loud. I hung up and stood at the window. Below the valley stretched out in clean lines of pine and snow. The retreat looked peaceful from here. Inside the building, the family facade had already begun to crack in ways that could not be papered over with new documents or quiet transfers. I had one more call to make before the day ended. David needed to know what his slush fund had just been used to attempt. Whether he answered or not would tell me how many pieces this family was about to break into. I picked up the phone in my suite and dialed David's number. The line connected after 2 rings, and his voice came through tight and guarded, the way it always did when he knew trouble was already at the door. Emily, he said, no greeting, just my name flat. I kept my own voice level. The phone log from the business center shows 14 calls between Diane and Linda in the last 3 days. All of them line up with movements out of your slush fund. Tell me what you knew. There was a pause long enough for me to hear the faint sound of traffic on his end. Then he exhaled once. I knew they were moving numbers. I didn't know they were using the fund as the bridge. Linda said it was temporary coverage for a vendor issue. Diane told me to stay out of it. I noted the exact phrasing. Temporary coverage, vendor issue, the same language that had appeared in the altered statements. David had not invented the cover story. He had accepted it because it kept him clean on paper, calculated like the rest of us. Only he had chosen the easier calculation. Temporary or not, the final transfer clears tomorrow morning if the partners sign I said. You still have time to pull the authorizations back. Another pause. I can't. The fund is already flagged internally. If I reverse anything now, it triggers an automatic review. Diane knows that. She built it that way. I ended the call without another word. The hesitation in his voice had told me everything the log had only suggested. David had not initiated the scheme, but he had protected it by inaction. That made him complicit enough. I walked back down to the business center and requested a fresh print of every account statement tied to the slush fund for the past 90 days. The clerk handed me the stack without comment. I took it to an empty workstation in the corner and began sorting page by page. Most of it was routine until I reached the section marked Internal Adjustments. 3 pages had been inserted after the original print run. They showed a second layer of authorizations I had never seen before. The amounts were larger. The destination entities were new shell accounts that ultimately routed to a single holding company, registered under Linda's maiden name. The hidden account statements were not hidden well. They had simply been buried under the volume of routine paperwork that no one double-checked during a retreat. I photographed each page with my phone, time-stamped the images, and forwarded the set to Sarah Bennett with the same neutral subject line I had used before. Then I sat back and waited for the next escalation. It arrived 40 minutes later in the form of a text from Diane, conference room C. Now, no please, no explanation. I went. She was already inside with Linda when I arrived. The door clicked shut behind me. Diane did not invite me to sit. She stood at the head of the small table, arms crossed, the same documents from the morning spread out in front of her. "You embarrassed this family in front of the partners," she said. Her tone was conversational, almost pleasant. "You flashed internal numbers on a screen like you were running a trial. That log could have been explained in private. Instead, you made it a spectacle." Linda stayed silent, watching me with the same calm expression she had worn at dinner. I met Diane's eyes and kept my voice flat. "The log is accurate. The statements that appeared overnight are accurate. The transfers are not temporary vendor coverage. They are a direct movement of reserves into accounts Linda controls. If the partners sign tomorrow, the company loses liquidity it cannot recover without external financing." Diane's mouth tightened at the corners. "You always did enjoy being the smartest person in the room, even when it cost you everything else." She leaned forward slightly. "Robert Klein is already wavering. 2 others have asked for separate meetings with me before the vote. They understand that stability matters more than one person's private crusade. Sign the papers tonight and I can still contain this. Refuse and the partners will choose the version of events that keeps their own equity intact." I did not reach for the pen. "You used David's unreported fund to mask the movement. That is not containment. That is exposure waiting to happen." Linda spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft. "Exposure only happens if someone forces it into the open. You're the only one threatening to do that, Emily." I looked at her directly. "Then you should have chosen a cleaner method." Diane straightened. "You have until the partners reconvene at 8 tomorrow morning. After that, the documents go to legal for processing whether you sign or not. The partners have already been told you are the one creating the instability. Choose carefully." They left the room together. I stayed another minute, letting the silence settle around the empty table. Then I returned to my suite and opened the encrypted folder Sarah had sent back. Her message was short. "Forensic review confirms the shell routing. The holding company under Linda's name received the first test transfers 3 weeks ago. I have a contact at the SEC who can open a preliminary inquiry if you authorize it. This is no longer just internal. I authorized it." By late afternoon, the partners had begun choosing sides in earnest. Robert Klein sent a one-line message, "I'm with you on the review." 2 others are still undecided. Diane is offering them board seats if they support the transfer. Victoria Lang, another senior partner I had worked with for 6 years, called me directly. She did not waste time on small talk. "I received the same packet you sent Sarah," she said. "The numbers don't add up unless someone is willing to absorb a massive tax hit or explain the source of the slush fund. I'm not willing to sign anything until the forensic report is complete, but I'm also not willing to be the only one standing in the way if the rest of them fold." That was the second confirmation. The partners were splitting. Some would stay quiet for the payout Diane had dangled. Others would wait for the external pressure to build. None of them wanted to be the first to force the issue into public view. I spent the evening compiling a second cleaner packet. This one included the hidden account statements, the full phone log with timestamps cross-referenced to the transfer dates, and a single paragraph summarizing the routing path through David's fund. I sent it to every partner who had not yet committed to Diane, plus a blind copy to Sarah's SEC contact. Then I shut the laptop and waited. At 11:47 p.m., my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I answered. "Ms. Harper," a man's voice said. "My name is Mark Reynolds. I'm with the forensic team, Sarah Bennett engaged. We've completed the initial trace on the shell accounts. One of them flagged an automatic IRS reporting requirement that was never filed. The holding company under your aunt's name should have triggered a large transaction notice 6 weeks ago. It didn't. That creates an independent compliance issue separate from the internal transfer. I asked the only question that mattered. How long until it becomes an active inquiry, 48 hours if we file the referral tonight? Less if anyone on the other side tries to move the remaining balances before we lock them. I authorized the referral. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Mark Reynolds added, "You should know the initial trace also pulled a secondary set of authorizations dated for tomorrow morning. They were pre-signed under a power of attorney that lists your mother as the sole signatory for David's fund. If those execute the remaining liquidity moves before any hold can be placed." I thanked him and ended the call. The second cliffhanger had arrived on schedule. Diane had not just planned the transfer, she had secured the legal mechanism to execute it without David's further involvement and without my signature. The partners' vote was now secondary. The real deadline was the pre-authorized movement scheduled for 9 a.m. I sat in the dark suite with the phone still in my hand. The mountain outside the window was invisible under cloud cover. Inside the building, the remaining family ties were already calculating their next moves. Some would side with Diane for the seats and the payouts. Others would wait to see which way the external pressure broke. David had chosen silence. Linda had chosen the destination accounts. Diane had chosen the mechanism that made all of it possible without needing my consent. I opened the laptop one more time and drafted a single message to the entire partner list, including Diane and Linda. It contained only the time-stamped referral confirmation from Mark Reynolds and the note that the remaining balances would be frozen pending review. No accusations, no demands, just the fact that the window for a quiet internal fix had closed. I hit send at 12:19 a.m. Then I shut the laptop, placed it in the safe, and waited for the morning to arrive. The partners would read the message before the 8 a.m. session. Diane would see it first. The question was no longer whether the transfer would happen. The question was how many of them would still be willing to stand beside her once the external inquiry was active and the numbers were no longer containable inside the family. The message went out at 12:19 a.m. By 7:30 the next morning, the replies had already begun arriving in clusters. Robert Klein confirmed he would not sign. Victoria Lang wrote that she had forwarded the packet to her own counsel. 2 others asked for time to review before the 8 a.m. session. Diane sent nothing. Linda sent nothing. David's number stayed silent. I dressed in the same tailored blazer I had worn the day before and walked to the main conference room at 7:55. The partners were already seated in uneven groups. Some clustered near the head of the table where Diane sat with fresh copies of the transfer documents stacked in front of her. Others sat farther down, phones still in their hands. Robert and Victoria had saved the seat directly across from Diane. I took it. Diane opened the meeting without preamble. "The documents are ready for signature. The adjustments protect the company's liquidity and keep control within the family structure we have always maintained. I expect a vote within the hour." She slid the stack toward the center of the table. No one reached for it. Robert spoke first. The packet that arrived at midnight changed the timeline. "The forensic trace and the referral are active. Freezing the remaining balances before any further movement is the only step that keeps this from becoming a regulatory matter we cannot contain internally." Diane's expression did not shift. "The referral is premature and based on incomplete information. The accounts in question are family-managed vehicles. They do not require external review." Victoria placed her own printed copy of the hidden statements on the table. "These show routing through an unreported fund into a holding company registered under Linda's name. The test transfers cleared 3 weeks ago. The pre-authorized movement scheduled for 9 this morning would have completed the transfer without any partner vote. That is not internal management. That is execution without consent." The room stayed quiet for several seconds. Then one of the undecided partners asked the question that ended the performance. "Who pre-signed the authorizations under power of attorney?" Diane answered without hesitation. "I did. David's fund required a single signatory for speed. I used the authority already on file." Mark Reynolds' email arrived at 8:17. Sarah forwarded it to the entire list at the same moment. The subject line read only "active referral confirmation." The body contained the case number, the freeze order on the shell accounts, and the slush fund, and the note that the IRS had been notified of the unreported large transaction pattern. The pre-authorized movement at 9 a.m. was now legally impossible. Diane read the email on her phone. For the first time, the composed mask slipped. She looked across the table at me. "You forced this into the open. You could have signed and let the family handle the adjustments quietly. Instead, you chose exposure." I met her gaze and kept my voice even. "The adjustments were never about liquidity. They were a silent asset transfer using my brother's unreported fund as cover. The partners deserved the actual numbers before they were asked to ratify the outcome. Linda spoke from her seat beside Diane. Her tone remained soft. You have dismantled the only structure that kept this family's resources intact. Whatever happens now is on you. Robert answered before I could. What happens now is a regulatory review that would have happened either way once the test transfers were traced. The only variable was whether the partners were told before or after the money moved. The vote never occurred. The meeting dissolved into smaller conversations in the hallway and on phones. 3 partners left the retreat within the hour. 2 others scheduled separate calls with their own counsel. Robert and Victoria stayed. They asked for a private room and closed the door behind us. Robert spoke first. The company cannot survive a prolonged inquiry with leadership divided this way. Diane will fight the referral. She will frame you as the instigator. Some partners will follow her because the payout she offered is still on the table. Others will wait to see who survives the review. Victoria added, "You protected the reserves, that matters, but the fractures are permanent. If you stay, every decision will be litigated through the lens of this week. If you leave, you can take your original equity plus a negotiated settlement and start clean." I had already run the same calculation. Staying meant constant defense of facts that were now public record. Leaving meant accepting the loss of the structure I had helped build and the remaining relationships that had once passed for family. The choice was not between victory and defeat. It was between partial recovery and continued entanglement. I authorized Sarah to open exit negotiations that afternoon. The terms were straightforward: my original equity stake released without discount, a one-time settlement covering the forensic costs and the portion of reserves that had been at risk, and a mutual non-disparagement clause. Diane countered with a lower number in language that would have required me to affirm the transfers had been legitimate. I rejected it. The final agreement, signed 3 weeks later, gave me the clean exit and the settlement. It also required Diane and Linda to acknowledge the referral findings in the company records. David's fund was dissolved under the inquiry. The holding company under Linda's name was dissolved with penalties paid from the remaining balances. The ironic redirection happened quietly over the following months. The bulk of the liquid reserves that Diane had tried to move did not reach Linda. They were consumed by back taxes, penalties, and the legal fees required to unwind the shell structure. What remained after the IRS claim went into a neutral trust that paid out only after the inquiry closed. Emily Harper received her negotiated share. Linda Thompson received nothing from the original plan. Diane Harper retained her personal holdings but lost the voting control she had used to direct the larger pool. The family fortune she had tried to consolidate simply dissipated into compliance costs and legal dissolution. No one won the full amount. The mechanism she had built to move it quietly had triggered the exact scrutiny she had assumed she could avoid. David called once after the agreement was signed. He did not apologize. He said only that the fund was gone and that further contact would complicate the remaining tax filings. I did not argue. I ended the call and blocked the number. Linda sent a single email through counsel requesting that all future communication route through attorneys. I agreed. Diane never contacted me directly again. The last message I received from her was the signed settlement document itself. 6 months after the referral email arrived, I sat in a smaller office in a different city with Robert Klein and Victoria Lang. We had formed a new advisory group focused on clean structure acquisitions. The work was smaller in scale and slower in pace. It required no slush funds, no pre-signed powers of attorney, and no family votes. Anna Torres, who had handled my calendar through the final weeks at the old company, came with us as operations lead. The 4 of us made decisions in rooms where the only leverage was the quality of the work and the clarity of the terms. Chosen family formed around competence and consent rather than blood and history. I still received the occasional update through mutual contacts. Diane's remaining influence inside the original company has narrowed to a single non-voting seat. Linda's holding company no longer exists. David maintains a reduced role focused on client work that does not touch the old accounts. The fractures did not heal. They simply stopped being my responsibility to manage. The cost was exact. I lost the remaining family ties that had once required performance and silence. I lost the automatic access to capital and decision-making that had come with the old structure. I gained the ability to walk into any room without calculating who might already be aligned against me. The settlement was smaller than the reserves Diane had tried to move, but it was mine without conditions. The new group operates without hidden ledgers or pre-authorized transfers. That difference is the only metric that still matters. Releasing the toxic ties did not feel like victory in the moment. It felt like the removal of a weight I had been trained to carry without questioning its source. The people who remained chose to stand on the same side of the facts. The people who left had already chosen the version of events that protected their own positions. Both outcomes were consistent with the record that had been created when the phone log and the hidden statements became visible. I no longer tracked the old accounts or the old names. The inquiry closed with penalties paid and structures dissolved. The referral achieved what no internal vote could have accomplished. It made the silent transfer impossible and made the true cost of the mechanism public within the only circle that still mattered to the people who had built it. The family that remained after the dust settled was the one assembled from evidence and consent rather than obligation and blood. That is the only ledger I still maintain. Thank you for listening to my story. How far is too far when the people who should protect the structure are the ones rewriting the rules to move the reserves before anyone can object? What would you have done when the referral landed? The partners were still choosing sides, and the pre-authorized movement was already scheduled for 9 the next morning.